in community, in education, and in politics, on campus, and across the world. Christ in everything. You're listening to Cedar 60. Welcome back to Cedar 60. My name is Johnny Gartner.
And my name is Benjamin Mays. Joining us today is Dr. Kevin Sims. He is a senior professor of political science here at Cedarville University. He has a PhD in government from Claremont Graduate School, and he has years of experience studying and analyzing U.S. presidential elections. Dr. Sims, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, so first question for you about the election results. This cycle we've had so far quite a large voter turnout. How do you evaluate this voter turnout? What do you think contributed to such a high number of people coming out to vote this cycle?
I think a couple of things may have driven voter turnout. And of course, surprisingly enough, even though we're a couple of days away from election day, I think we're still going to be analyzing voter turnout and reasons for voter turnout, who came. I think we're, that's going to take weeks, if not months, to figure all of that out. But I think an initial response is, I think turnout was driven to some extent by COVID-19. I did a little bit of that for us in that it allowed people to vote by mail. It increased the number of people voting absentee. And it also allowed for early voting. So you had a number of locations around the United States where early voting took place. And people took advantage of that. I think rather than taking time on election day, and all that could be rather cumbersome on an otherwise busy workday, why not vote early at a place and a time of day that works for you? So maybe Tuesdays aren't a good day for you, but Wednesdays might be. And I think we saw that with some people. Actually, I heard people say that. That worked for me to vote on Thursday afternoon at 3:00. So I went to early voting. And, a lot of people did that. And then drop off, you had kind of curbside drop off for ballots. We had that here in Ohio. My neighbor did that. I did my mother-in-law's absentee ballot for her. I dropped that off, just kind of pulled up, dropped it into a box and left. And then I could track it online to see where her ballot was, make sure they got her ballot and that it was being accounted for. So I think that's one of it, but was, kind of the whole COVID experience, I think opened some opportunities for voter turnout, for more people to get involved. And I think the other part of it was, I think this, I'll tell you what, I think this was the year of the energized voter. And both those who were pro-Trump as well as anti-Trump, I think were energized in one way or another to turn out and vote. Boy, this year, either going to reelect the guy or going to finally get rid of the guy. And I think that energized a lot of people and drove voter turnout.
Okay. Follow up on that, when it comes to voter turnout, do you think going forward in presidential elections and even smaller elections, do you think that early voting and vote by mail, is that going to become more common? Are we going to see more and more people deciding to vote early, maybe because, like you said, it's more convenient?
I think so. And again, I think this is going to take some analysis, probably over the next few months as we look at turnout, and we look at who used the early voting, who used mail-in voting. And I think the other part of it that's going to drive the future, to what future extent we're going to be using these methods is going to be the outcome of the court cases that are growing by the hour. And, so I think the outcome of these court cases are probably going to determine a lot of that too. That said, I will say, I kind of think it will. Look, we are in a new age of voting in America, and we like a lot of opportunities. We like a number of ways to be able to express ourselves through the ballot box. So I think, the early voting, the mail-in voting, the curbside drop-off, as well as going on election day, I think may expand. I think that the record turnout that we saw this time may become a little bit more commonplace, in the years ahead.
You touched on we're going to have to study the political alignment of people who used mail-in voting, who used early voting. But from a preliminary aspect, can you still kind of assign maybe who used it more just from exit polls, those kinds of things? Because I think on election night, the Biden camp was referring to the red mirage, saying that a lot of people who voted in person were going to be Republicans, and a lot of those votes that were going to come in through mail later to be counted might be blue. Would you agree with that? Expound on that a little.
Yeah, I think so. I think initially, yes, I do agree with that. I think a number of people who used early voting probably tended to be vote Democrat, a traditional demographic that favors the Democrat Party. But I also think that what we saw with early voting and the drop-off voting and the mail-in voting and stuff like that, I think people, with COVID concerns, I think, they probably did some of that, and that could be people on the left or on the right politically. People who are physically challenged, it's just a lot easier for them to do that and to use a drop-off voting or mail-in voting if you are otherwise, limited in movement. So I think some of those folks were helped out. But what we are seeing, at least the indications are, early voting tends to, in the past, has tended to favor Democrats. That seems to hold true this time as well. And it doesn't matter what state. Florida, that held true. Michigan, it's held true. Pennsylvania, it's held true. And Nevada and Arizona, that has held true. And I think probably every other state's probably the same thing. So I think some of the traditional things that we've seen before probably hold true this time, with the Republican electorate probably showing up on election day more often than not.
And I think we talked about this a little earlier in the first couple of questions, but do you think because of the focus on mail-in voting that people who might not have otherwise voted by mail or voted absentee?
Yes. Yep, I do. I really do believe that. I think that's going to bear out in any future studies that are done. I think we're going to see that. But I'm sure it did. I'm sure, because I just know. I visited with people who either did it themselves or had relatives that this early voting and mail-in voting, it accommodated them in the voting process. So yeah, I think it was a positive outcome there.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there. But Benjamin and I think we both voted absentee. Well, let me rephrase that. Benjamin, I think, voted in person, but college students like us, at least I know I voted absentee, have been voting absentee for a long time. So how do you think that the college age represented in voting this year? Do you think that it stayed the same because we've always been voting absentee, or do you think that maybe it increased this year, something along those lines?
Yeah, look, I'll back up just a second to the first part of your question. I thought of something when you said that you voted absentee, and a number of other college students did. Yeah, and I think that is traditionally what has been done. College students typically vote absentee. The very first time I ever voted, I was a college student here at Cedarville, and I voted absentee and filled out my absentee ballot. And I'll tell you what, it was a lot more cumbersome then than it was now. I had to fill it out in front of a notary public and have her sign off on it. And then I had to fold it up and sign the letter, and she had to sign the letter and stamp the letter. I mean, it was cumbersome to vote absentee, but I did it that way, and so did a number of my friends. So I think that's kind of been traditionally what people have done. They have voted that way, and I think that's going to continue. I'll say this: I polled my classes, I've got two sections of our large gen ed, and I polled them both, and I said, how many of you folks have voted? You voted absentee or you voted in person? I would say far more than what I've seen before. Far a greater number of students voted this time around than have voted before when I've done similar polls in previous elections. So I think it's there. I think it's happening, and I think it will continue.
To kind of move topics, Dr. Sims, in your opinion, what states had the greatest impact on this election? I know it's pretty early and we still don't know everything, but do you think there were any upsets this time, and what numbers kind of surprised you on election night?
Yeah, so give me about 15 minutes here while I name off 40 states that are probably going to be, have us up in the air and maybe surprised us a little bit or had the greatest influence or effect on voting this time around. But, I think let's go with the obvious ones because I think they are so obvious and they're ongoing. So Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, they're all there. Why Alaska hasn't been called, I mean, it's just absolutely beyond me. I could have called Alaska before the polls even closed. I mean, you just know that place is, is pretty heavily and pretty solidly Republican. So why we're sitting here, waiting to see just what Biden voters, I guess, are going to come out of the wilderness to vote for him. I don't know. So but I think those that we've been watching over the last couple of days, I think is, I think those are the ones that we're going to watch. I think they're having the greatest influence in what's going on. You could probably say Florida too, Florida and Texas. And I say Florida because what we saw in Florida, it has been described this way. And I think upon reflection and my interest of politics and culture, I think this is true. I think this carries some weight, this idea that Florida is really kind of a cross section of America. You got a little bit of everything in Florida. Demographically, a little bit of everything. So you've got working class, you have upper class, you have lower class, you have poverty driven, you have ethnically a diverse community. You have a Jewish community in Florida, a strong and large Jewish community in Florida. You have obviously a Latino community in Florida, a white middle class, upper class community. You have an African American. You've got all these things. So I think that what we see happening and what kind of response we're seeing in places like Florida, as well as in Texas, I think is going to tell us something and be significant to us later on. I think your second part of your question was any surprises or anything like that. I don't know. Maybe a little bit in places like North Carolina is a little surprising. Arizona, I think, surprises me how close that is between the two. But yet, on the other hand, on larger reflection, a lot of people that move from California and move to places like Arizona and Nevada and Texas. So though they moved, maybe escaping some kind of economic trial in California, it's interesting to me that they moved to Arizona or Nevada or Texas and they brought their politics with them. So in other words, they came and they still voted Democrat. I don't know if they thought something magically was going to change, with the Democrat Party when they moved to another state or not. But, Yeah, I think we've seen a little bit of that happen. I'm not so sure that Arizona has not been called early. I'll tell you what, the counties they're looking at in Arizona, Pima County and Maricopa, I know those counties pretty well, and I think they may have jumped to a conclusion here. So I would not be all that surprised to see Arizona end up going the other way. It really would not surprise me. And we'll see as the votes come in. Last time I checked, I think they've still got somewhere between 400 and 550,000 votes to count yet. That's a lot of votes, guys. That's a lot of votes to count. And so, we'll see where that goes. Okay, I know I took too long on that question. Sorry. There you go.
It's okay. I just have a quick follow-up question for you. So, obviously our election system isn't designed for this mass amount of mail-in voting. That's why it's taking so many days to count all this. So do you think that because of some of those things you just mentioned that we could move towards a more developed system for mail-in voting, or we'd move away from it, and how that affects future elections?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question, Johnny. And I think that I don't think mail-in voting is necessarily going to disappear. Though there are some that are fearful of it. And obviously, Donald Trump President Trump's one of those people that, he warned us against, mail-in voting is going to be rife with fraud. Well, look, by the time all the court cases are done, we may find out he was right. But I think it's here. I think it's here, and I think it's probably here to stay. But I really think there's going to have to be some fine-tuning. We're going to have to go in and we're going to have to work on this thing just a little bit. And how it's got to be done, I'm not sure. I think there's got to be a way to certify these votes and certify them so that they are legitimate. We don't have dead people filling out mail-in votes and mailing them in. And I don't know, I just read a story just before I got on with you guys. I think it was in Wisconsin where that's happened already. It's either Wisconsin or North Carolina is one of those states where that's happened already. They've traced some of these ballots back to people who are deceased. Okay, somebody filled out that ballot and mailed it in. So there's got to be a check on those things. But all that said, I think that mail-in voting is probably here. We're just going to have to fine-tune it and make it work a little bit better.
Do you think it could transition to mostly mail-in voting, or do you still think that, we spent millions of dollars as a country over improving in-person voting technology in the last
years?
You
know what? So. A good question again. You might be onto something there, Johnny. It could be that that's what's going to happen, is we're going to end up with some kind of mail-in system. Who would have thought 20 years ago that we would have been communicating so much, and so much of our information would have come from a thing called social media? In 2000, who would have heard of social media? What? Social what? But, here we are. 20 years later, we get a lot of information that way, and a lot of communication is done that way. Is there going to be some variation on that that's going to deliver ballots in the future? Yikes. Yeah, right now, I just see it as a system that's fraught with terror. It looks like it's an obvious piece of fraud to me. Could certainly be open to that. But, 15 years from now, that could all change. It could be a lot better. So maybe that will happen.
If I could change gears real quick. When it comes to COVID-19, how did it affect your experience this election cycle? Was it a big deal, or was it not as much anything to be concerned about?
How did it affect me? Really not much at all. Other than when my wife and I went to the polling place, we had to stand 6 feet behind somebody else and we wore a mask. Other than that, really not much of anything. They also, and I didn't bring it with me, but they gave us a little stylus that you could use to punch the ovals on the computer. And they said, well, you can either use your finger or you can use this, nifty little stylus right here that you get to take with you today as a, commemoration of your voting. And so I use that. Other than that, probably not much. And I don't know, when my wife and I voted, we voted about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We were in and out of the polling place in 15 minutes. That was not the situation at my polling place in the morning. People were waiting up to 2 hours, if not longer. So, as the day went on, it got a little shorter. Maybe the COVID separation, the distancing and that kind of thing might have had more of an impact in the morning than it did with us in the afternoon. But I would say, in answer to your question, how did it affect me? Really minimally.
Do you think it has caused maybe a little bit of this delay in getting the results, maybe because of fewer people to count ballots? Is that at all possible?
Yeah, I don't know. That may be something we're going to learn over the long run. That's going to be probably a good analytical question for 3 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now. My initial response, Ben, is I don't think so. I was really, it looked to me, my polling place had plenty of poll workers. They seemed to be doing fine, seemed very happy with what they were doing. And that looks to be the experience around the country. It looked like, polling places were working pretty well and the workers were doing pretty well. So I don't think it had that kind of, a bad effect on what was taking place.
If I might jump in here, I think at the beginning of the, this fall election season, there was a lot of talk about how it's not safe to go vote. You need to vote by mail. But I think that story kind of changed on the news over the last couple of weeks. Do you think that there will be a spike in cases because of the election, or do you think that because of the insanely strict protocols that all these polling locations had, there really won't be much of a spike?
Yeah, I really don't know, Johnny, if that's going to be the case or not. We'll see, I guess. I think, kind of my gut feeling on that is probably not. I don't think you'll see a big increase. Sure, people were standing in line sometimes 2 to 3 hours. But you know what? They were wearing masks. They were standing 6 feet away from anybody else around them. Polling machines, voting machines, even though I used my stylus, somebody, as soon as I was done voting and pulled my card out of the machine, a poll worker immediately stepped up to my thing and sanitized it. So I think a lot of the safety protocols for COVID-19 were used and were in place. I'd be surprised if there was any kind of big spike in the number of cases because of voting.
Yeah. I think that one thing this election certainly does represent, even the conversations about going to the polls was very partisan, and Republicans were saying we got to go to the polls and vote in person. President Trump was constantly tweeting about that, versus originally Democrats were saying vote by mail, it's not safe. It really signifies the divide that this election represents and how close this election is. So moving forward, how do we as Christians respond to this divide, and maybe in the circumstance of 4 more years of a President Trump, or in the coming 4 years of a President Biden? How do you see us responding to help heal that divide and help move the country forward?
Yeah, I think a large part of the divide, at least to me, anyway, I think is, the cancel culture group, I think has fostered the divide. A lot of the unrest, Antifa, has certainly been party to that. I think there has been not to step away from the two extremes, the two extremist groups like, Antifa and maybe cancel culture, to come back to something else that's, I think a little bit more middle of the road, and that we've all experienced probably in one way or the other. Just race relations, I think, have made things a little bit more tense. But I got a comment like that, a question like that the other day in one of my gen ed sections. And somebody said, gosh, what do you do? What's your recommendation? I said, really what it is Christians need to be grace driven, and we need to wear grace. We need to be people of grace. We need to put on grace when we interact with other people. And that it's imperative all the time. But I think to put a sharper focus on it, I think the way that we respond to those with whom we are going to disagree, we need to, we're going to disagree, but do it agreeably. Be kind about it. With a measure of grace in ourselves and the way that we respond. Making sure that we're not becoming angry with anyone or sharpening the differences too much. I think remember our position in Christ, and that Christ walked in humility and grace. We need to do the same.
And in terms of participating in elections in the future, this election was really big. Like, should Christians vote for Trump or not? How can we still participate in the election process? Maybe I voted for Biden or maybe I voted for Trump, but how can I still represent myself as a Christian in doing that? Do you apply the same principle?
Yes, absolutely. And it doesn't matter, who you voted for. And obviously there were Christians who voted for both candidates as well as third party. So I think, no matter where your vote was, I think you've got to exercise that. Being a Christian supersedes anything else, your political positions. If you are really endeavoring to live a Christ-like life and to be a model of Christ in your daily living, boy, that has got to transcend anywhere, anything that you say you do with regard to politics. So you need to step beyond that. And I think that's important for all of us, no matter our political inclinations.
I think Benjamin and I would both agree that that's kind of the message we're hoping to portray through Cedar 60. So we're thankful for you for sharing that. Last final seconds of the episode here, we're going to give you 60 seconds to just say any message you'd like to say to our listeners, if you'd like to say something.
Yeah, good. Thanks. And I thank you for inviting me on Cedar 60. I kind of watched you guys dream on this in the war room here at in the History and Government Center for a while, and I was intrigued by that. I thought, well, this is going to be kind of interesting to see what these guys come up with. So I want to say congratulations. I think it's well done. I think you put yourself out there and you represent yourself well. More importantly, you really represent Christ. I really see that. There's a model of humility with Cedar 60. And I think you really try to exemplify some positive features of a Christ-like walk. And I think that's really good. I think that's important for where we need to be. And I commend you guys for doing that. So, you know what? Keep up the good work. Keep it going. And, I look forward to seeing a lot more interviews like this with other of my colleagues and perhaps some students and that kind of thing, and other people that you care to interact with. So keep on keeping on, keep up the good work.
Thank you, Dr. Sims. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. It's a great discussion. We appreciate it.
Great. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for coming on, Absolutely. Dr. Sims. We appreciate the encouragement there. So thank you.
Very good.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Cedar 60. We hope to have you back next time. Have a great day.